So we can talk about spinal nerves. Time-wise, I will see if I will have to split it in two, which is fine. Autonomic nervous system is pretty short. But basically, you have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. You have 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal nerve. These nerves form branches, also known as rami. So the rami, the branches are called dorsal and ventral. As you can imagine, dorsal rami, the dorsal branches, and just to make sure that everybody's following, ramus is the same as the branch. Rami is a plural. So dorsal branches innervate a very short strip of a muscle here. See the dorsal rami. So it innervates short strip of muscle around the spinal column, while the ventral rami extend and innervate massively the muscles that are most of the muscles of the body. Okay, let's put it this way. So what's happening here? Yeah, I don't know. I want you to acknowledge the existence of so-called plexuses. Okay? So what is a plexus? Plexus is a network. Plexus is a network. Here's the question. We are right here at Metro Campus. Network, yeah. We're here at Metro Campus. I'm telling you that you need to drive to the airport. Okay? And you look at the map and realize that the 77 is not moving. Okay? Do you have other options? You can do 90 and then go south, right? You can do 176, maybe a little, What I'm saying is there's more than one route from here to the airport. Okay? This is the idea of a plexus. Plexus is a network of nerves. For instance, this is the cervical plexus. It means that each muscle is innervated, controlled by the fibers from different spinal nerves. So now imagine that one of the spinal nerves gets injured. It doesn't mean that the muscle will be completely paralyzed or a patch of skin will lose sensitivity, because there are other spinal nerves that send the fibers to that muscle. Make sense? The only part of spinal nerves that does not form plexus is thoracic. Thoracic spinal nerves do not form plexuses. Okay? So as I already mentioned, more than one nerve innervates the muscle, and the nerve damage cannot completely paralyze it. Okay. Hmm? I think you will be able to answer that question in a minute. No, seriously. Say again? C3 and C4 more like a neck. Okay, so you figured out that I highlight things that are key to know, and I don't highlight things that I'm not going to ask you, right? So cervical plexus. First, 4 cervical nerves, format C1, C2, C3, and C4. So anatomically, what do you need to know? In general, know that cutaneous nerves, the term cutaneous nerves, means that they deliver sensations from the skin to the spinal cord. Okay? Now, 2 nerves that I can ask you about anatomically and functionally are ansa cervicalis and phrenic nerve. So these are motor branches. Ansa cervicalis controls the muscles that are critical for speech, modulating your voice. Okay? We're good? Phrenic nerve is probably, well, one of the most important nerves in the body because it controls diaphragm. And what do you think is going to happen if the phrenic nerve is damaged for some reason? You're going to have, well, you can, but it's going to be a lot of trouble. Okay? Huh? No, you just can't. You can't expand one half of your thoracic cage, so your respiration will be severely decreased. Now, did I highlight any of these numbers? C2, no. There will be no, like, I will not ask you what is the origin of the phrenic nerve. Like C3, C5, right? I'm not going to ask this. I'm going to ask about the function, though. Okay? Now, brachial plexus is the most complex plexus in among spinal nerves. I'm not going to ask you about the trunks or roots or divisions. I'm going to focus on the final product, sort of. So I'm going to highlight both the anatomical questions I'm going to highlight on the image, the functional questions I'm going to highlight on the table, okay? So first nerve that you must know is axillary, okay? It innervates, and I promise that from now on the questions will be focused on the motor branches. Does that make sense? Yes? So I'm more interested in you knowing that if axillary nerve is whacked, you cannot contract properly your deltoid muscle and you cannot elevate your arm, right? That kind of stuff. So this is the short green axillary nerve. Another nerve from that long list that I want you to know is pectoral. Controls muscles of your chest. Okay? Does that make sense? So there's the 2 pectoral nerves, but they pretty close. Medial and lateral pectoral.
So how does it affect functionality?
What do you mean? If it's damaged? Well, think about what chest muscles do. The easiest example, the easiest way to demonstrate, it's a bench press, right? So when you're bench pressing, the function of the pectoral muscles is to do this or this. So you won't be able to raise your arm properly like that. Or you won't be able to do this. Like, slap someone on the cheek. Make sense?
I wasn't sure if it was more based off of shoulder mobility rather than...
It's all about as we go to the muscles of the arm itself, you're going to see a lot, like it's super clear. Okay? So, spinal nerves that control the arm muscles. First is musculocutaneous. Okay? Upper arm flexors. This is the musculocutaneous nerve. So upper arm flexors. What do they do? Can you, okay, give me an exercise. Yeah, the curl, right? So if it's whacked, you cannot properly flex the elbow. Then we have two nerves, median and ulnar, that control lower arm flexors. Flexors of the forearm, flexors of the forearm. What is the difference? So, if you look at the image here, you can see that the ulnar nerve is located on, interestingly enough, medial aspect of your arm. Can you see that? While the median nerve is on the lateral aspect of your arm. The easiest way to demonstrate it will be making it fingers. So 3 fingers that are median, that's ulnar nerve. 2 fingers that are lateral, the index and the thumb, that's median nerve. Okay? So if you look at the image here, you can see that the ulnar nerve, that's pretty, it's going to be pretty thick, older than that. Okay. Okay, here we go. When the system decides to cooperate with me. This is the ulnar nerve. Can you see that? Yes. This is a medial malleolus of the humerus. If you whack your medial malleolus against the solid surface, funny bone, yeah? Because it hits the ulnar nerve. And after the funny bone, if you try to make a fist, you won't be able to. Because your nerve gets a little paralyzed. Okay? The funny bone. It's not funny. I agree with you. I agree with you. When I was 10, I passed out because of that. It was so hurting. And then we have radial nerve. It's the very long nerve which is responsible for the control of the posterior muscles of the upper arm and the forearm. So basically, this, the extension of the elbow, and the extension of the wrist. Okay? Now, I want you to think about why right now my wrist is parallel to the floor. It's parallel because 2 groups of muscles, the forearm flexors here and forearm extensors, play a tug of war. If extensors start pulling with a greater force, I extend, well, hyperextend my wrist. If flexors start pulling, I flex my wrist. Imagine someone fell asleep at the table with the forearm being a cushion, like this. And through the night, there was a constant pressure on the radial nerve. So that pressure will inhibit its ability to control the forearm extensors, and when you wake up, your hand is down. This is called the wrist drop. Okay? It's not permanent, obviously. Okay. Lumbar plexus, 5 lumbar nerves. So, I want to demonstrate to you that the names of these motor branches make perfect sense. Femoral nerve. It runs along the anterior aspect of your thigh. Which muscles are located on the anterior aspect of your thigh. Quadriceps, what do? Extend your knee to kick a ball, right? If it's whacked, you can't kick a ball. Then we have obturator nerve. So it goes through the obturator foramen. It's a pretty large nerve right here, okay? And it goes to the medial, the inner thigh. The muscles of the inner thigh, what do? No. Okay, if you want to train the muscles of the inner thigh, what do? Squeeze. No. You're squeezing. Huh? That's adductors. Adductors. Yeah, I may have misheard you. That makes sense? So, adductors. Yes. So that's your obturator nerve. Then we have these two nerves, iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal. Take a look. Let's take a look what they do. So, hypogastric, that's lower abdomen, right? Inguinal, that's basically the pubic region around genitalia. So, lower half of the abdomen, the muscles are controlled by iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal. Okay? Does that make sense? And this is the nerve. I talk about it more because it's not on that big picture. I'm going to show you this. So genitofemoral is not going to be cannot be part of your anatomy question. But genitofemoral, no, it's fine. Genitofemoral nerve is actually clinically fairly important. So it innervates the cremaster muscle in males. This is the muscle, which is a part of the male scrotum, responsible for lifting testicles inside the body when it's too cold. That makes sense? Because the proper temperature is essential for sperm maturation. So when cremaster contracts, the testicles ascend into the body to keep them warm. Okay? Yeah, they squeeze up, and then when it's hot, they descend down to get cool. Yes. But why this is important? In men, it's a pretty common hernia is a pretty common condition, and herniation may affect what's called a testicular cord. I think, yeah. So basically, a bunch of blood vessels and nerves that reach the testicle, and to test for the proper function of that nerve, you can do what's called a genitofemoral reflex. If physician suspects that, say, on the left side there is a damage, they can ask the patient to drop the pants, get one of those reflex hammers, and run the blunt end of it along the medial aspect of the thigh. If the reflex is present, the left testicle will jerk up, just like a knee jerk. If the reflex is absent and it doesn't jerk, it means that there's something wrong with that nerve, and it might be the hernia. Okay. Sacral plexus. 5 sacral nerves and a coccygeal one. So, I guess that word rings the bell. Sciatic. Yeah? So sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in the human body, but there are 2 nerves. Okay? So sciatic nerve runs along the posterior thigh. So what do you think the posterior thigh muscles do? Hamstrings, they flex your knee, right? So that's one. They also, if you think about this, can be, Yeah, but it has to be very, very uncomfortable seat, like seriously uncomfortable seat. It will also partially affect ability to squat down. Okay. Now, here at the popliteal area, popliteal region, right here, sciatic nerve branches into the tibial nerve and the common fibular nerve. As you can see, tibial nerve remains in the back of your lower leg and controls the muscles of the posterior lower leg. What do we call those muscles? Calves, yes. And what can we use them for? To stand on our toes. Common fibular nerve runs ventrolaterally, so to say, and controls the lateral and ventral muscles of your leg, lower leg, and we use those muscles to stand on what? Yeah, stand on the heels, right? That makes sense. So, when you start looking at, the tibial and the common fibular nerves, so tibial, there's a lot of, stuff here. But the point is, the tibial nerve controls your, posterior lower leg. Common fibular controls the muscles that are essential for standing on a heel. Now remember the analogy that I gave you, tug of war between two groups of muscles. So essentially when you stand on your toes, your posterior leg wins. Would you agree with that? Yes. When you stand on your heels, your anterior leg wins. So if the common fibular nerve is injured, it means that the only muscles that are working are in the back, which means you're going to walk on your toes. It's called a foot drop, analogous to the hand drop or wrist drop. Tibial nerve, posterior muscles don't work, and you walk in a very weird way called shuffling, because you kind of have to stand on your heels. Okay? A few more pretty straightforward nerves. Nerves, yes. Gluteal, I'm going to bundle them together. Everybody's comfortable knowing where glutes are? Yeah. So buttocks, if it's damaged, you can't properly squat up, like stand up. And pudendal nerve. Now, this is a huge chunk of it is sensory. And the sensory chunk is important. It's a sensation from genitalia, okay? But the motor part, muscles of perineum. Perineum is the space between the anal orifice and the external genitalia, okay? That makes sense? So muscles of perineum and external anal sphincter. Why I put so much attention to that? The muscles of the perineum are responsible for, at the proper time, yes. Using the bathroom when you want it. Controlling urination and external anal sphincter defecation. So the damage would be you become like a baby. The opposite. People would have incontinence. Because those muscles will not be able to contract, which is essential to hold the pee. Well, that may be a different story. Why she doesn't. Okay. Dermatomes. Well, okay, before dermatomes, thoracic nerves. Thoracic nerves form intercostal nerves. So basically 12 nerves that run between your ribs. So that's kind of boring. They don't form a plexus. Okay? Now, we already mentioned the dorsal rami. I'm not going to spend too much time on that except for the fact that it, innervates the strip of muscles in the back. I'm going to focus on dermatomes. Okay? So this is the definition. Let me explain what it means. So look at the dude. Okay? Let's say dermatome C5. Okay? Where do you find the dermatome C5? Among other things, in the shoulder. Right? So it means that the sensations, somatic sensations, from that patch of skin over the shoulder are delivered to the CNS by the 5th cervical nerve. Am I making sense? Now imagine you have a patient with maybe some hernia, and you take a pin and start poking that patient in the shoulder, and the patient feels nothing. So you can say probably the herniated disc affects C5 because that's the dermatome. That makes sense? So that allows you to determine the potential damaged region in the spinal cord by the dermatome that's affected. Okay? Please understand this. Dermatomes overlap. Okay? So the boundaries that you see on that image, they're not like chiseled in stone, if I may.
So that first bullet point is the definition.
Exactly. Yes. That's the definition of dermatome. Now, what type of a question you can expect for dermatomes? I will ask you to identify which dermatome is located in, I don't know, a brachial region. Okay? I'm going to be pretty, I'm going to make it distinctive. So if you look at the brachial region, right, in an arm, it's T1, and you have C7, C6, and C8. So T1 right here, C6, C7, C8. I'm not going to ask you questions like which dermatome is located in the brachial region, and then it goes like C7, C10, C5, huh? On the right, look, here. C5, and that's T1.
Oh, T1.
T1, yes.
So,
okay, make sense? So I will give you which dermatome is located in the brachial region, and give you the answers. T6, C6, T12, or L2. If you know the regions and the dermatomes, the question is not a problem. Like basic logic. Okay? Are we clear? Okay. So now we're going to jump and talk about the effectors. So we mentioned that effectors of the nervous system of muscles and glands, and that only skeletal muscles are somatic, while cardiac and smooth are visceral. So skeletal muscle is innervated by so-called neuromuscular junction. You can see the neuromuscular junction on this image. At this point, you don't need to know the processes that go on there. I want you to understand one fundamental difference of the skeletal muscle innervation from everything else. This is a very well controlled structure. Okay? It's one axon and one muscle fiber. That makes sense? So if you have a neuron that transmits a specific signal, that signal will reach one, maybe more actually, muscle fibers. But the point is, it's going to reach the precise, exact muscle fibers. Not more, not less. Am I clear? And like neuromuscular, like skeletal muscle, smooth and cardiac muscles are innervated by varicosities, which release neurotransmitter like it's carpet bombing. Okay? If you look at this varicosities, imagine that they start releasing a neurotransmitter. Here. So this guy starts releasing neurotransmitter molecules, right? And they start diffusing, affecting all those smooth muscle cells all over the place. Does that make sense? This is why we call them... Yeah, that was a mistake. Hold on, let it wake up. Okay, another name for them is, okay, which means the neurotransmitter, and then it's wherever it goes, okay? All right, after that unfortunate event, I'm sorry. We will continue our conversation. So this is what I meant, synopsis en passant. Okay? So it's like broad. Now we're going to talk about the controls, and I'm going to highlight the ideas that you need to understand. So with the motor controls and with the sensor, both we're going to start with the lowest level. So in the levels of motor control, the lowest level is the segmental, which is anatomically within the spinal cord. So it is responsible for reflexes and automatic movements through so-called central pattern generators. Central pattern generators control repetitive movements such as locomotion, walking, okay?
Central pattern what?
See again?
Central pattern
Generators. It's written right there. Then above the segmental level is the projection level. Projection level consists of the motor cortex and pyramidal pathways, such as corticospinal pathway, okay? And it directly sends the signals responsible for voluntary movements of the skeletal muscles. So it sends the signals to the spinal cord, and then information goes to the muscles. And finally, the highest level is the pre-command level, which consists of cerebellum and basal nuclei. Here it is. So pre-command level does not control skeletal muscles directly. Instead, it produces the patterns, the plans for the complex motor activities. So these organs send the patterns, the motor outputs, to the cortex and brainstem, which then directly executes voluntary movements. So probably the best definition of the activities at the pre-command level is this: unconscious planning of voluntary movements. We talked about it. Remember, we talked about Huntington's disease, when you can't prevent your muscles from uncontrolled movements. So starting or stopping movements, that's basal nuclei. Coordinate with posture, that's cerebellum. Block of unwanted movements, that's basal nuclei. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's the degree you need to understand. As we discussed, basal nuclei, when they release the inhibition, we can produce coordinated movements. So that wraps up sorry, the motor controls. Here's the proposition. Hear me out. We're going to go through the sensory and then we're going to cut it, because reflexes are going to take some time. Okay. So receptors. Before we start talking, and unfortunately, yeah, this shit is memorization, folks. Cranial spinal nerves and this, it's memorization. Okay. So I want you to understand the types. Let me highlight them in the text. Exteroceptors and interoceptors. Does the term make sense? Extero, outside. Intero, inside. So the receptor in your stomach is an interoceptor. The receptor in your skin is exteroceptor. Proprioceptor, position. Okay? Now, type of stimulus. I'm going to name the receptor. You're going to tell me what the receptor senses. Thermoreceptor. Chemoreceptor. Chemicals, yes, thermoreceptor. Mechanoreceptors. Mechanical stimulus, pressure, vibration, whatever. Now, that you may not know. Nociceptors, pain.
Say it again.
Pain.
Pain.
Nociceptors sense pain. Now, can pain be induced by temperature?
Yes.
Can pain be induced by chemicals?
Yes.
Can pain be induced by mechanical stimulation?
Yes.
Yes. So you can have, hear me out, a mechanoreceptor which is a nociceptor, so it senses pain. You can have a chemoreceptor that senses pain. Does that make sense? I'm going to give you an example, really important clinical example, how it can be applied to some treatments that we use. So these are three non-encapsulated receptors, receptors that are not surrounded by the connective tissue capsule. They include free nerve endings. If you look at the list on the right, what they can be, the answer is everything. It's it. Free nerve endings can be any type, like they can function as an enteroceptor, exteroceptor, proprioceptor, mechanoreceptor, blah, 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 blah. Merkel discs. Do you remember Merkel cells from the skin? That's the part of a Merkel cell. It's in the epidermis, so it's exteroceptor, and it's a mechanoreceptor that's responsible for sensing light pressure. Hair follicle receptors. The location is surprisingly hair follicles. These are mechanoreceptors that sense the deflection of the hair. You know, like when, if you can run like an object or a finger without touching the skin, but if you touch the hair, you will feel it. Now, encapsulated receptors. So these are three types of mechanoreceptors. Tactile, lamellar, and bulbous corpuscles. Okay? All of them, well, most of them are, all of them can be exteroceptors. Exteroceptors. But here's what I want to focus on in particular. So let's take a look at what they sense and where they are. So tactile corpuscles sense light pressure and the discriminative touch. Okay? The touch degree, like you can say strong, weak, where it is, that kind of stuff. Where are you going to find those? Hairless skin, particularly nipples, external genitalia, fingertips, soles of the feet, and eyelids. What's in common between those areas? They're very sensitive. You can see that they're sensitive because they have that very special type of receptors. They add extra sensory perception, right? Now, dermal papillae. I know it's not really fair, but do you remember which layer is on top in the skin? Papillary or reticular? Papillary. So they are very close to the skin surface. So they are uniquely positioned to sense light touch, because light touch does not penetrate too deep. Okay? What if we are dealing with deep pressure or high frequency vibration? Then we're leading into lamellar corpuscles, which are in the dermis and subcutaneous tissue, right? Because in this case, the pressure will reach that location. That make sense? Like if somebody presses real hard, that bypasses tactile corpuscles and engages lamellar. And then we have bulbous corpuscles, very deep in dermis, hypodermis, and in joint capsules. Deep pressure and stretch. Okay? Now, we will talk more about the receptors. Give me 1 second, I will highlight this. So these are proprioceptors, muscle spindles, tendon organs, and kinesthetic receptors. Next week, on Monday, we're going to talk about the function of a muscle spindle and reflexes. It all is linked. And we're going to discuss the sensory controls. Okay? But right now, I just want very quickly to talk about the 3 levels of the sensory control organization. Hear me out. I'm going to highlight important points. Receptor level of control consists of what? Receptors. Right? Receptors. So, for a receptor to fire the signal, 3 conditions should be met. Stimulus and receptor should match. I mean, lamellar corpuscle cannot sense temperature. It's not a thermoreceptor. Stimulus must act on the receptive field. What does that mean? So, let me ask you a simple question. I am going to give you a 10 centimeter ruler and a 50-yard measuring tape. And I will ask you to measure the length of the hallway outside. What are you going to use? Measuring tape. Because the size kind of falls into the measuring spectrum, measuring range, right? Make sense? So, this is what a receptive field means. Light touch will not trigger bulbous corpuscle because it's not in its receptive field. It's not sensitive enough. Make sense? And stimulus must be able to generate graded potential that then can become an action potential. So the potentials that are generated can be of 2 types. Can be a receptor and the generator potential. So what is a generator potential? So imagine this is a neuron. Okay, I'm going to make the body a little bit bigger. This is the sensory neuron, right? So the receptor part is actually a part of a neuron. So when there is a stimulus, it generates the potential straight on that neuron. So that's generator potential. Now, receptor potential is different. So you have some kind of a receptive cell which is adjacent to the sensory neuron. So the stimulus acts on the receptive cell. It releases neurotransmitter, and neurotransmitter will trigger or not, if there's not enough, it won't, the action potential on the sensory neuron itself. Okay? So this is the receptor potential.
So it's just separate.
There are, so the sensation, the act of reception, does not happen on the neuron, it happens on the special cell. Okay? That's receptor potential. Okay? Now, receptors can adapt. There are two different types. Phasic receptors are fast adapting. Tonic receptors practically do not adapt. Tonic receptors are receptors that sense position, nociceptors, and pain. Position, proprioception, and pain, nociception. Why? Why you want a receptor that senses pain to not adapt? So you know it's there, exactly. Right now, hear me out. Right now, okay, sorry, different thought. Imagine that you are getting in a hot tub. Initially, it feels, well, hot. But as you sit there for some time, no, it doesn't cool down. Your receptors adapt to the temperature and decide that this temperature is now normal. That makes sense? So, if you will make it hotter, you will feel that. Okay? What about proprioception, the position? Why they are non-adapting? Do you want to be aware of your position in space? Yeah. It's dangerous to not know that your knee is bent. You know, so this is why they're not adapting. And also, if you think about this, like somebody tries to break my elbow, it's going to hurt. I'd rather know that somebody is trying to break my elbow, you know? Okay? So, circuit level, first, second, and third order neurons that, you know, that new sensory tracts, sensory pathways, all right? Perceptual level, that's your somatosensory cortex. That's your perceptual level. It's responsible for processing, so like how strong it is, where it is, how does it feel, you know, quality, is it cold, is it hot, is it sour, is it sweet, and whatever. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, we're going to finish this next week. Before we get to somatic reflexes again, this is the continuing, yes. So, before we talk about somatic reflexes, a few words about types of pain. So, I'm going to give you some clinical relevance here, folks. So the nociceptors, the pain receptors, respond to chemicals. These chemicals can be released by the tissues that are injured Okay? Or they can be released during the process of inflammation. Now, you're all familiar with the different types of pain sensation, right? Pain can be acute and it can be dull. Burning pain. Difference, acute pain, it sets on faster because it's transmitted through the myelinated fibers. And slow fibers transmit burning pain. Okay? When you are physically stressed, particularly physically stressed, you experience analgesia. So where does it come from? When you are in a fight or flight mode, as we will learn pretty soon, sympathetic branch of autonomic nervous system induces the production of endorphins and enkephalins, which makes perfect sense because think about the evolutionary history of humans. Fight or flight, like we're not supposed to be exercising. We're supposed to either chasing the prey or running away being a prey, okay? So in either case, if we have to fight, we should not really feel pain. It's during fighting. After that, it's fine, but during the fight, we should be analgized. So endorphins and enkephalins, two inhibitory neuropeptides that are produced in the brain, do exactly that. The problem is the receptors for those molecules that are called natural opioids. These receptors are also very easily stimulated by opioids that we know as drugs. And I don't remember if I mentioned that before, but I can't stress it enough. I really don't like when people say, oh, this is the bad drug, this is a good drug. The drug can be good or bad after clinical trials. If clinical trials show that it does what it's supposed to do, great, you know. Drugs themselves aren't good or bad. They do something to humans, okay? I can kill a person with potassium chloride easily. So when opioids were discovered, well, first, one of the properties that was discovered is the fact that they are painkillers. People have been using morphine for, 100 years at least. And then we discovered other things. Okay, for instance, scientists developed oxycodone, hydrocodone, and the apex in this development was fentanyl. So I want you to understand something. Fentanyl was developed by a drug company as a painkiller. And it's great because it acts in very small amounts, which makes it convenient for physicians. But yeah, it can be abused, as many other drugs that we use in day-to-day life. Okay? So one interesting feature, and I'm trying to give you some reflection sort of on your potential encounters in your future clinical practice. So one drug that actually binds to opioid receptors, that is agonist of opioid receptors. Some of you may have it at home, and I'm not talking about oxycodone or something like that. If you have diarrhea, what do you use to treat it? Pepto, or Pepto is different. Pepto is just like general anti-diarrheal because it's mostly in the stomach. Imodium. Imodium, yeah. So, people with opioid addiction, one of the side effects of that addiction is constipation. Opioids inhibit the movements of the gut. Imodium is a drug that binds to the receptors, opioid receptors in the gut, and inhibit your gut movement, okay? And that treats diarrhea. So here's the question. When people develop opioid addiction, the drugs that they take bind to the receptors in their brain. This is why they get addicted. That Imodium thing, the drug that's there, can it bind to the receptors in the brain as well as receptors in the gut? Weakly, but yes. Guess what people use it for? As a recreational drug. You have to consume an enormous amount of Imodium which will completely ruin your liver, and you're going to get severely constipated. But, you know, people do other stupid shit. Okay, now, pain from the organs, visceral pain, also known as perceived pain. Okay? Again, some kind of an injury. For instance, ischemia results in injury to the heart, and that sends the signal that person has a heart attack. Now, if you look at specifically the pain, I'm just using the heart as an example. When a person experiences a heart attack, the pain that this person feels radiates from the left thoracic region, which is reasonable, but also in question. So also from the left lateral aspect of the neck and the medial aspect of the left arm. All of this is blue. You see that? So, like, heart is not in the arm. Why pain? Why it feels like your arm is in pain? The pain signals that reach your brain, pain signals from the left arm and pain signals from the heart, they go through the same nerve fibers, same wire. And for your brain, for the visceral cortex, which is in the insular lobe, for visceral cortex, the location is, it's left arm, which it isn't, but, you know, that's how you perceive that pain. And you can go ahead and just look at other stuff. For instance, I'm trying to find something, you know, reasonable. Okay, so appendix. It's a huge area, and appendix is super small. So that's perceived pain. That makes sense. Now, what is hyperalgesia, chronic pain, and the case of it, phantom limb pain? When you experience pain, it's a sensation. Can you remember a sensation? Yeah. Like, if you try, I don't know, chocolate for the first time, you may not remember its taste in about a week after that. Now you're not going to be surprised when you try chocolate, so you know how it tastes. You made this memory. Same goes with pain, but the memory is made not at the perceptual level, not in your cortex, but rather at the circuit level, in your spinal cord. So spinal cord, when it experiences pain signals, forms primitive memories, which it can replay after the source of pain is gone. So for instance, if somebody gets foot amputated and they receive general anesthesia, somatosensory cortex is not receptive. Their brain is pretty much like knocked out, right? But the spinal cord is very much functional, so all those pain signals during the amputation will be stored, quote unquote, in a spinal cord, and when general anesthesia is gone, spinal cord happily replays, quote unquote, the pain sensation to the somatosensory cortex.
So can that happen in other instances with surgery aside from amputation?
Yeah, it can be. The question is how long. Because if you think about like a surgical procedures, it's not like you cutting wood. It's not like a surgeon stays there with a saw and cuts it for solid 5 minutes. I used amputation because it's probably the most pain-inducing procedure. Like if somebody goes through appendectomy, now it's laparoscopic, it's minimal pain. Quick incision, quick snap, and it's gone. Making sense? So, how can you prevent it? Do epidural. Block down the transmission of signals through the spinal cord, and that's it. I mean, you're still going to, pain's still going to be, the sensation will be produced. Just reaches the spinal cord and the door is closed. And it's like, it has nowhere to go. Okay? Now, I want to quickly bring your attention to this statement, the chemicals. Okay? So, when you have, let's say, I still have a bit of an ankle injury, but if I, need to tough it out and go through some, march, okay? What would I use? to numb the pain?
Say it again.
Say again?
What did you say?
What would I use to numb the pain in my ankle? Ibuprofen will take a long time, legit. That's painkiller, huh? But topically, what would I use topically so I don't feel?
Lidocaine. Lidocaine.
Why are you so fascinated? Lidocaine sucks balls because it penetrates through the skin very poorly. You need to inject it there. No, I can't do that.
Oh, you said what type of-
Icy hot, right? What? Yeah, icy hot, Bengay, it's all the same. How does it feel when you apply those?
It gives you a hot sensation.
Sure,
And then
gives you a hot sensation, right?
then it numbs the area. With some-
So what happens is my injured ankle sends the signals to my brain that it hurts. When I apply icy hot, the signal that it's hot basically trumps off the signal of pain. I'm still in pain. I'm still injured. But it's like, if you will bring, I don't know, a church choir in here and I will start singing, I would be still speaking. You won't hear me because, us again, it's a distraction. Exactly. Yes, the heat pad is complicated. All this ice or heat, the latest research is inconclusive. There is a physiological reasoning to do both at different stages, because when you injure it immediately, you have a massive inflammation. Ice reduces the blood flow to the area and reduces edema and reduces the pain. But since it reduces the blood flow, it also slows down the healing. So it's a double-edged sword. Same with the heat pad. If you apply heat to the injured joint, for example, it increases blood flow, which is not bad for healing, but it will cause more edema and potentially more pain. So I don't know. I didn't see any data. Question?
Would a headache or a migraine be considered like visceral pain, or is that something separate?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. If a headache or migraine will be considered a visceral pain. Yeah, I guess it's going to be visceral pain, but the reason for it, so to my knowledge, migraines are more neurological, but I am walking on very thin ice here. Like, that's my very tangential knowledge. Headache often, so reasons for headache in an otherwise healthy person. Blood pressure changes, okay? Dehydration, and intoxication. Hangover, pretty much, okay? For the most part, like if it's during that, it's usually blood pressure changes, okay? So now we're going to talk about reflexes, and while I like talking about reflexes, I dread talking about muscle spindle, so bear with me. For some reason, I don't think it's logical, but I don't like talking about muscle spindle. So reflex arch. Reflex is the automated response, period. Response that you don't have to control. You clear? Reflexes can be somatic. It can be autonomic. So somatic reflexes control skeletal muscles. Okay? Autonomic reflexes control responses produced by anything else. Cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or some kind of a gland. So now let's take a look at a couple of different types of reflexes here and trace the entire arc. I want to highlight that the sequence of events is the same for somatic and autonomic reflexes. The difference is number of synapses, so it's not really a conceptual difference, and the effectors at the end. So it all starts with some kind of a stimulus, which is perceived by a receptor, which sends the afferent signal through the sensory neuron into the spinal cord. Now, in the first example, you can see that the sensory neuron forms direct synapse with motor neuron, which conveys efferent signal to the skeletal muscle. Does that make sense? Now, replace skeletal muscle. This is a somatic reflex. If you replace skeletal muscle with smooth muscle or cardiac muscle or gland and add to spinal cord brain stem, because some autonomic reflexes can be mediated by brain stem as well, you get yourself autonomic reflex arc. Other than that, they're identical conceptually. Now, another option, so this reflex is called monosynaptic because there's only one synapse. In some cases, the sensory neuron, shown here, forms synapse not with a motor neuron, but with what's called an interneuron. This red neuron right here. Red neuron then forms another synapse with a sensory or efferent neuron, with a motor or efferent neuron, and it will exert its controls on the skeletal muscle. So this is called polysynaptic. A common question. Can we have more than two? Yes, we can. More than two synapses. Yeah, it's possible. Okay? Questions so far? All right, folks, I apologize for my disdain for this. This is muscle spindle. Hear me out. So what does it sense? Because it's a sensory set. Muscle spindle senses changes in muscle length. In other words, stretch. Okay? Tendon organs, where do you think those are located? Tendon organs. In tendons. Yeah, they are in tendons. They are in tendons. They, say again? In the tendon, yes. And tendon organs change, they detect changes in tension. I want you to have a very clear understanding of the difference between the two. Huh? They are not quite. They different. So, what is muscle tension? Your muscle produces tension when it contracts, right? When you need to move something. Okay? Does that make sense? But your muscle can be stretched and not be contracted.
Yes.
For example, if you will hang me upside down by my legs, I don't have to contract any muscles, but the muscles in the legs are going to be stretched because, again, force, yes, because the weight of the rest of my body pulls down on those leg muscles. That's a stretch. Now, quick question: a contracted muscle, can it be stretched?
Yes.
Yes. Do a pull-up. Muscles in your back, like latissimus dorsi, that are primary flexors of your shoulders during the pull-up. Flexors. That's going to be adductors, okay? Primary adductors of your shoulders. Those muscles are stretched by the weight of the rest of your body that's like below them, right? So they contracted and stretched. This will become real important in a minute. So now let's get to the anatomy of the muscle spindle.
So is this like within a muscle fiber?
Give me a second. Like literally, this is something I am about to say. So imagine a muscle, any muscle. We don't have muscle figures here, but I think you can kind of imagine, like say brachioradialis. Okay, so there's a muscle. So muscle consists of fibers, which do the movement, do the work. Those fibers that do the work are called extrafusal. So these are extrafusal fibers. They do the work. Okay, there are a lot of them. Okay, so they do that. And then there's a couple of fibers in the muscle spindle. Okay, they small, so they really don't contribute much to they don't contribute much to the work that muscle does. Okay, so the fibers inside of the muscle spindle are called intrafusal. So again, extrafusal fibers, right here. Extrafusal fibers are the ones that you think about when you think about a muscle. Intrafusal fibers are the ones that you probably hear for the first time about. Okay, they're inside the spindle. Now you may have noticed that extrafusal and intrafusal both have this part fuse. Fuses protect your electrical circuits, right? Muscle spindle in some way protect it. It's like a muscle fuse. Okay. Extrafusal versus intrafusal. Make sense? Yeah? Okay. Now, since it's a sensory receptor, it has to have some afferent fibers to kind of leave it, get out of it. I always say that there's a special place in hell for all anatomists, and they will burn for the rest of their lives for the names that they give to different structures. I really want to look in the eyes of a person decided that flower, spray, and annular spiral are great names. They reflect nothing. And unfortunately, this is what we have to know. Okay? Annular spiral are kind of primary sensors here because they can detect both rate and degree of stretch. Okay. Make sense, right? Now, if we go back for a second here towards the reflexes. Reflexes that we're talking about at the end of the arc have a skeletal muscle, right? So whatever sensations that muscle spindle will sense have to trigger the response that's mediated by this skeletal muscle. So they have to have some efferent motor fibers. So this red one is alpha efferent fiber. And you see where it ends. It ends right here. Okay? So alpha efferent fibers send the motor signals to the muscle, to the extrafusal fibers. Okay? There's also a small fiber called gamma efferent, which sends motor signals to the intrafusal fibers. Am I making sense to you? Okay, yeah? Keep it in mind. This is why I hate this. Because I give you, like, I have to do this whole setup with a bunch of stupid names before we actually can get to the point, to the function. So, what's the difference between these two? Well, we kind of mentioned that alpha efferent fibers, they send the signal to contract extrafusal fibers. Gamma efferent fibers send the signal to contract intrafusal muscle. The question is why this is important. And that's what we're going to try to answer right now. So first, please ignore information on the right side of the slide and focus on this. Okay? You will see why I'm doing this. Okay, this is your, on the left, this is your unstretched muscle. Okay? What you see in the center of the image is intrafusal muscle fibers, all right? Pretty clear. So when your muscle does not experience any kind of stretch, spindle sends action potentials to your brain with a certain frequency. That's it. Just certain, it's a baseline. It's a signal, no stretch. When muscle becomes stretched, what happens to its length? I'm going to ask you a bunch of really stupid questions. It becomes longer, and the intrafusal fibers, as a part of a muscle spindle, also become longer. Okay? That deformation of a muscle spindle results in the increased frequency of action potentials. So instead of your stretched muscle is going to send, okay, all good? So what is going on the right side? So listen carefully, because one of these images is showing you what doesn't happen. And this is the left one. So let's say your muscle contracts. When your muscle contracts, what happens to its length? It shortens. Muscle spindle is a part of the muscle, right? So if the entire muscle shortens, muscle spindle will also shorten. Okay, and ends of intrafusal fibers would come closer to each other, like this. And these intrafusal fibers would become loose. Can you see that? They're going to get some slack. And when they become loose, they don't have a capacity anymore to send this baseline signals, because they so loose, there is no stimulation of the afferent fibers whatsoever, and you would see that. You would see the lack of action potentials. Okay? You can't make zero more frequent. So somehow you have to overcome this obstacle. What actually happens? When your extrafusal fiber receives a signal, that's your extrafusal. My red arrow demonstrates the motor signal, okay? Okay? When it receives it, it receives this signal through alpha efferent fibers. Sounds good? But then you have gamma efferent fibers that send the same efferent signal via gamma efferents But this signal reaches not the extrafusal but the intrafusal fibers. Can you see it now? So in a nutshell, alpha efferent endings will cause the contraction of extrafusal fibers. Gamma efferent endings will cause the contraction of intrafusal fibers. Those signals arrive at the same time. So when your extrafusal fibers contract, your intrafusal fibers contract as well. Which means your muscle spindle properly shortens and the baseline levels of contractions is maintained. This simultaneous arrival of efferent signals to extra and intrafusal fibers is called alpha-gamma coactivation. Okay. So basically its purpose to allow the simultaneous contraction of extrafusals and intrafusals in order to maintain the baseline action potential frequency when muscle is not stretched. This brings us to a stretch reflex. And for the sake of brevity and simplicity, we're going to jump straight into the knee jerk reflex. The reason for it, it's a classic example. Stretch reflex is a general concept. Knee jerk reflex is a stretch reflex. Okay? So you all, I presume, went through this test, right? Yes. So here's what happens. You are sitting on bench, bed, whatever, and your leg, lower leg, freely hangs. So the physician uses this hammer, okay, to hit you very gently on the patellar tendon, which attaches your quadriceps muscles in the front of your upper leg. Attaches them to tibia, the main bone in the lower leg. When the hammer hits the tendon, this tendon gets some stretch. What do you think? Yeah, it does. And since tendon gets stretched, the stretch is sort of projected on the quadriceps muscle, of which the tendon organ is a part. Okay? So, at the end of the day, this little hit with a hammer causes your quadriceps muscle to stretch. Okay? So the stretch is sensed. Let me change the color so it's more obvious. Brown. Okay. So first, the stretch is sensed by the muscle spindle, and that sensation reaches your spinal cord through the sensory neuron. All good so far? Yeah? Now, within the sensory neuron, within the spinal cord, sensory neuron forms two synapses. One of them is a direct synapse with a motor neuron. You see the red one? Yeah? The red one. So this red motor neuron runs back to where? What is that? The quadriceps muscle. The one that is stretched. So let's go over this arc one more time. Quad is stretched. Stretch signal reaches the spinal cord. Spinal cord produces the output, which goes back to that stretched quadriceps. And that output is excitatory. I'm not going to ask whether the synapse is excitatory or inhibitory, but it's excitatory. So when you excite a muscle, it contracts. So 3A represents the signal which causes contraction. right? What about another arc here? So here you can see that sensory neuron forms a synapse with interneuron, the green one, and interneuron synapses with a dark blue motor neuron, which runs to your hamstring. Okay? Little tangential information. Your quadriceps. Can you give me an example of a movement that quadriceps would produce? Kicking. Okay, kicking the ball, right? So extending your knee. Can you give me an example of a movement that hamstrings can produce? Like, yeah, if you want to hit yourself in the butt, right, with your heel, that's going to be hamstrings. That's flexing the knee. Am I making sense? So whatever quadriceps do, hamstrings undo. Hamstrings in this case is the antagonistic muscle. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, yes, you're absolutely well. Probably some would argue that like muscles that move your tongue may be in a more complicated relationships, but by and large, the big superficial muscles, yes, absolutely. They have antagonists. Okay? So, what happens to that antagonist? It's inhibited. Okay? So at the end of the day, antagonist is inhibited / relaxed, while the stretched muscle contracts. So now we can put this all together. This is what it's going to sound like when your quadriceps is stretched. That signal reaches its spinal cord and triggers two responses. One response is for stretched muscle to contract. Another response is for antagonistic muscle to the stretched one to relax. So it doesn't inhibit the contraction. Doesn't block the contraction. So it's like we're not only contracting your quadriceps, we also prevent hamstring from opposing that move. Okay? That inhibition of antagonistic muscle is called reciprocal inhibition. Now, next time you're at physician office and they do this on you, try to notice. It's really hard because it's not very obvious. The jerk is really small. Okay? That makes sense? Because if it's not, we have a problem. Stroke. And if it's absent altogether, you have serious problems with the spinal cord. Okay, classic diagnosis of neurosyphilis. So the reason why it can be absent is if myelination is damaged, if something is ruined, if the signal cannot go through fast enough. Okay, so that's one first take-home message from that conversation. Reflexes in general are used to test for the integrity of your spinal nerves and your spinal cord. Okay? Why is stretch reflex important? This is one of the best conversations we can have. This is fantastic. Well, first of all, stretch reflex allows you to transition from one movement to another in a pretty smooth manner. Anyone does or did gymnastics? No? Yes, did? Okay. Could you, like, I'm asking, could you do stuff on a beam?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think I can walk, like, along the beam? Do you think I never did gymnastics?
Not without stretching first.
Yeah, probably. Like I wouldn't be so. I would give myself half of the beam. Like I would fall off about there. Yes. Can I train to at least maintain? Yeah, I can train to maintain balance and become more and more comfortable and stuff like that. So that's sharpening of stretch reflexes. Not literally sharp, but you get the gist, right? It's training the stretch reflexes for a smooth transition and maintenance of balance. Okay? Do you watch baseball?
Yes.
Why? I don't think so. That's not the point.
I like to play baseball.
That's not the point. Have you ever seen the movement of a pitcher's shoulder in a slow motion? Slow motion.
Well, when they replay it, does that count?
I don't watch baseball, so I don't know what replay looks like.
Slower.
Like very slow motion of the shoulder movement, specifically like shoulder.
Yeah, I seen it replay. It looked like it might.
It's not normal. Human shoulder should not move like that.
Yeah, it looked like it's like.
It's like dislocating. Yes, eventually it will, and there eventually will be rotator cuff tear, because by practicing that throw, they increase the threshold of activation for a stretch receptor.
Maybe going at like 98 miles.
So again, I think it's just the technique slightly different. Because, like, if you think about it, different objects, different technique of a throw. Baseball throw is more or less straight. Football throw is crazy. So yeah. But here's another example. At some point in your life, or maybe now, can someone do a split? Or could someone do a split? Yeah.
I can still do one right now.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah? Can do a split? Huh? Okay. Yeah. I want to specifically ask for sex match. Any women here who cannot do a split? Are you anatomically different? Like why you can't and they can?
Because I cheerlead and I trained and they maybe didn't. I'm pretty
It's
sure
not.
they,
But what
they
is?
could do one if they tried.
It will be the last that they will ever do, sure. But what is the difference? I cannot do a split, never could. Can I train myself to do one?
I think so.
Yes, I can. What should I do? What I can
Stretch first.
stretch. It's going to take me a long time. I have to stretch every day. I have to be in stretched position. So when I stretch my muscles, because of the stretch reflex, muscle spindle activates the stretch muscle and they contract and prevent me from going further. By pushing the boundary, I send the signal to a muscle spindle. This is new normal. This stretch is normal. It's not dangerous. And as we increase that threshold, you can spindle stop sending the signal. Yes. Yes. Okay. So anatomically, nothing prevents a human being from lifting a leg all the way to their head. It's all about stretch. Okay? That makes sense? Now, well, there you go. Now, tendon reflex. Tendon reflex is essentially, hear me out, it's essentially the opposite of a tendon reflex. Okay? All good? So we're going to use quadriceps as an example again. But this time, I'm not stretching them. I'm actually contracting them. I'm producing tension. So here's an example. Let's say I can squat 200 pounds. Okay? For the sake of the story. And it's my good, comfortable weight. I can probably push out maybe to 20 to 30, but that's going to be like one rep and it's going to be super hard. I can do that. A friend of mine, that's real, he squats, say, 500. That's peak. Yeah, but he, like, comfortably, he squats 400 easily. So what we do only concentric movement, he and I. So I put 200 pounds on, like, a rack. I crawl under it and I stand up with it, right? So I produce that movement partially using my quadriceps. Would you agree with that? Okay? Yeah. Yes. Just making sure that I'm not. Yes. So I'm using my quads. Then he loads it up to 400. I get under the barbell and I push real hard, like super hard. And I just get. Does that mean that my muscles are incapable of producing that amount of tension?
You gotta practice and keep stretching and stretching.
It's not stretch, it's tension. It's not a stretch, it's a tension. It's a force. My muscles contract. They have to produce a certain force to lift 400 pounds. Why can't they? What stops them? What stops them is... Oh, no. No. I will exemplify it in a minute.
Your body not used to that.
Hang on. Let me finish the story. You will have time for questions. Let me finish the story. So this is your quad. Quad contracts, right, to produce tension. And this tension acts on this Golgi or tendon organ, which sends the signal of tension, not stretch, to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, you have two arches. One reflex arc, the one that's on the left, this one. It sends the signal through we're going to call it a red neuron, to my quad, which is, mind you, tense at the moment. The signal goes, relax. Because the tension apparently is so bad that it can damage or tear the muscle. At the same time, second arch, the dark blue arch, sends the signal to the antagonist, hamstring in this case, and hamstring contracts. Analogously to reciprocal inhibition in case of the stretch reflex, this is called a reciprocal activation. Okay? Good? Now, give me 1 second. I really want to Google it really quick. Okay. So, there is a woman. Okay, now I'm going to switch to kilograms. I hope you don't mind. Okay. So she did, yes, deadlift. So this woman weighs 48 kilograms. Slightly over 100 pounds. Okay? She holds the world record deadlift, which is 168 kilograms, which is close to 400 pounds. So 4 times body weight. And she's small. So to your question, do I not have enough muscle fibers? Oh yes, I do. But my tendon organ has a threshold of activation that prevents my quadriceps from being torn by the effort, by the force that I can generate. Am I making sense? When I lift heavy, I set the new threshold for tendon organ. And in addition to that, when I lift heavy, I increase the amount of connective tissue in my muscle. So if I'm regularly squatting, my muscle becomes more mechanically resilient. Do you follow? And yes, micro tears, absolutely normal. This is why you feel sore like 2 days after exercise. So when you have the tears, they healed, and that basically it's a scar tissue, which increases the mechanical strength, not the ability to pull, but just the resilience to tension. So the activation threshold becomes higher. I keep pushing, more connective tissue, great activation threshold. Okay? And you can Google that lady. Her name is Wendy Chan. She's small. Like, she is small. Like, she's not too big. Okay? So, she's not huge. She's not like Arnold. You can see that she's pretty muscular. But it means that it's more about the connective tissue rather than the pure size, pure hypertrophy of the muscle. Any question? Okay. Go ahead.
So if you're like building up all that connective tissue and then get injured and can't like use it.
Yes, of course, yes. If you get injured, eventually first of all, you're losing muscle mass. And you're going to lose some of that connective tissue. Yes. So you have to, quote unquote, injure yourself a little in order to maintain your physical shape. And just as an example, I'm looking at some other participants. Here's an interesting thing. When you start going, when you start going from lower body mass to higher body mass, deadlifts become actually less and less impressive. The absolute world record in deadlift among men, do you know who holds it? Game of Thrones, the Mountain. Yeah, Thor Bjornsson. Yes. He deadlifted 1,057 pounds. Hafthor Bjornsson, it's a strongman from Iceland. So this guy weighs close to 500 pounds himself. So 400 something. So he deadlifted nearly 2.5 of his own body mass. That woman deadlifted 4 of her body mass. That's way more impressive. Okay? Just to give you a perspective.
Quick question.
Sure.
Tendons, like if they are damaged, do they repair themselves?
Tendons? Yes. If tendon is severely damaged, if it's partial torn and sprained. If it's sprained, it's going to heal, but it's going to take forever, as yours truly exemplifies by himself. I injured myself 2 weeks ago. It still hurts. I can finally jog for like a couple of miles, but it's not. And it's going to be healing for a few more weeks, for sure. Okay. Now, this is a really cool reflex. This is called flexor crossed-extensor. So, imagine that you are walking down a dark alley. Somebody jumps at you and grabs you by an arm. What you're going to do first? You're going to pull your arm towards yourself, right? You're going to do this. If my watch represents the offender's hand, I'm going to do this. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to try to push them away. So I'm going to flex the arm which that person grabs, and I'm going to extend the opposite arm. The arm that's on the other side of the body. This is why we call it flexor crossed-extensor reflex. Another great example, if you ever stepped on a Lego. Happened to you? Yeah. So let's say if I step on a Lego with my left foot, what am I going to do? I'm going to lift it. I'm going to say a few words, but I'm going to lift it, right, and transfer my entire body weight on another leg. To lift my left foot, I have to flex the knee. To support my body weight on the right leg, I have to extend the right knee. So now, last bit, this is like what you can totally expect. I want you to understand which muscles are activated and which are inhibited. So do you remember the terms ipsilateral and contralateral? What's the difference between the two? Yeah, ipsilateral is on the same side. Contra's opposite, yes. So, now, take a look. In relation to the stimulus, which is my watch, okay? So on the left arm, so in relation to the stimulus, when I flex my left arm with watch, this flexor, I'm flexing it, this flexor, activated or inhibited? Activated, because I use it. Opposite extensor, inhibited, to not be an obstacle. When I push the person away, extensor, activated or inhibited?
Activate.
And the flexor is inhibited. So you can say that what muscles are activated? Ipsilateral flexor and contralateral extensor. Which muscles are inhibited? Ipsilateral extensor and contralateral flexor. Okay? Now these are more, I call them fun reflexes. So first of all, reflexes are essential for testing the functionality of spinal cord and spinal nerves. If you have kids, if you have a particularly small child, under 1 year of age, the myelination of the spinal cord is not complete in them yet. It's still going on. So they exhibit so-called Babinski sign here. If you draw with reflex hammer, the blunt end of it, if you draw along the lateral border of the sole and then under the fingers, those infants will show this sign with toes fanning out. As myelin sheath becomes complete, like any adult with functional spinal cord and spinal nerves, they will show this curling of the toes if you do the same pattern of movement. Okay? That's really important. That shows that in a child, does myelination go on as it's supposed to? Okay? Another really cool reflex, one of my favorite reflexes, that can be only observed in infants, and I think it disappears about the age of 2 to 4 months. It's a Moreau reflex. No? So we have twins, and then they were infants. So basically, when an infant lies on the back, like fully chill, if you tap them on the belly, they do this.
Yes. This
is hilarious. They were lying next to each other. Now just tap one and then another. It was great. So, a couple more reflexes just to mention. There's a abdominal reflex. Okay, tests for the integrity of thoracic spinal nerves and spinal cord. So when you see the red arrows here, these red arrows show that you move the object on the skin along that arrow and the belly button will jerk towards. Okay? Now, you have to understand that when I draw these arrows, it's not like your belly button suddenly migrates to the side of your body. It's a very small jerk. Okay? And I mentioned, I believe, genitofemoral reflex before. The one that is used to test the integrity of the sacral plexus and genitofemoral nerve. Okay? Sounds good? All right. Let's take a break.